Hey everyone, here we are again. I'm I'm up in the middle of the night trying to get one knocked out for you this week, so I don't have that problem. Between us, we don't have that problem of um, having to send out a blog instead and apologize for delays. Before I start, David D, thank you very much for that healthy recurring donation. Ilya F, Doug Anderson, nice donations that really much appreciated, and thank you for keeping us encouraged, I think is a nice way to say it. As you can see, we're talking about something to do with the start. I want to say with these videos, some of this is getting repetitive, but you guys, if you haven't looked through the list, if you just punch in Paul Ingebretson talks about painting, it should just come right up, and there should be a 1 to 325 list. So you might want to look at the titles of those before you ask questions here. But I'm glad to have these two questions because there's some things I think I'm being misunderstood about, and for that reason, it's useful to have a revisit. And but yeah, I really do recommend it. There's three at least that pertain to this one. One is about the Barg method and that way of thinking, and that's part of why I'm calling this the earliest marks. The kind of mark making you make. But by the way, the earliest marks also has to do with the earliest thinking. The earliest marks you make even in your life. Never mind in a particular painting. So there's some interesting ideas that come up here, but. I also want to apologize for whoever wrote this first question because I couldn't go back and find it again on your list. And so I'm calling you unknown. I don't know if I doubt that my producer can change that once we put it in here. So, with apologies. All right. But oh yeah, so I was going to say you can see me doing a drawing a drawing of a horse head. It's just a cast, and I'm showing you my methodology, so that'll answer some of the questions you're talking about. I've had a video on starts, Boston School starts, which really does give you a clear idea of certain aspects here, and but there are probably other ones too. Oh, well, of course, there's so many. Here's a question from Unknown. I can finally describe my conundrum with drawing, mostly, in angles. Perhaps others struggle with this too. And by the way, I thank you for bringing it. It's really one of those things I like about your questions. They're useful for everybody, to the extent that I answer them reasonably. The concept and general impression are easy to establish. Now, I'm sorry, but let me read the whole thing and I'll come back. I'm going to walk through this, and I'm going to jump into just a few pictures from time to time. The concept and general impression are easy to establish. I think most of you haven't found that to be so, but I'm glad if you have. And I am so sorry, I don't know who you are. But I think I do know who you are, but I don't want to start throwing names around. But neither involve exacting detail. Now that's what we're going to be addressing here. The ovoid and angles trend towards the concept of gesture, which is relational but not exacting as in a likeness. So there's a whole subject on ovoids and angles, I think, which is relational but not exacting as in a likeness. So that's okay. Now comes the hard part. I have the worst time seeing the need for correction until I've painted enough detail to observe what's wrong. And there's that word detail again. So I use the word articulation until I've articulated enough to observe what's wrong. In other words, the location of high readers seem correct far into my effort, only to find them off by a fraction of an inch here and there that I couldn't see without painting them in detail. Now I'm going to start through the back of this and go to the front, but when you say high readers, and then you're off by a fraction of an inch here or there, you got to remember that you're putting in these high readers and you're not presuming on them to be perfect. You're putting them in with the idea of getting started. And then as you bring in new data, those will be part of the corrections right along. And then you won't get to the end there and you should find nothing of a correction by that point. So I want to just make that clear to you. There is no fixing of 3 or 4 or 5 points, our arabesque ideas. There's no absolutely fixing of those things. You do need more data. You need the ensemble of things. to rather grow. And you said it really well, because we all run into this thing as you're a young student in painting, and that is that as you get closer and closer to the likeness, you can see more and more how far off you are. As you become more like in the look of nature, you become, in other words, the noodling and the form and all that sort of stuff, that which is just more stuff. It's more easy to see how you're going to be off, or how you are off. It's not unusual at all for us to get frustrated, but in fact, that's part of the reason I began to work the way I did ultimately, was because I didn't like that idea of being that far off, and I knew there was a factor there in the development of the work. Do you see what I mean? So I started bringing in the look of nature earlier, instead of doing a generic kind of drawing and that sort of thing. And I'm going to show you some images to bear this out. But that's a very key thing. So that was my strategy. So you can say now, so how much of the look of nature do I have to actually make the errors show up? And that's like the key question, you might even say. It was for me at the time. So coming backwards, though, the ovoid and angles trend toward the concept of gesture, which is right. Although the ovoid is a proportion issue too. So there's a bunch of things. Even if you talk about the ovoid of your arabesque, the leading points in the figure they create, that has a general tilt and a gesture that always has to be observed. So yes, but it has a sort of a generic quality to it. Yeah, but it still should be accurate, oddly enough. The more data, the more precise your data is that creates that ovoid. You see the points you're making, or the areas you are drawing and that you're floating around there. The more articulate those are, and again, that word is an alternative to detail, but detail actually does imply stuff you don't need yet. Where articulate doesn't. That implies that you're actually saying it better. Whatever it is you are using to set up that big ovoid, right? And this, if you look at the second part first, almost can remember your name of the second guy. If you look at the Thefordesmo, if you look at the second part of this video first, you might see how I'm talking. I mean, how this really comes after the fact. Construction drawing doesn't contain those things anywhere near as well as I've seen as drawing the real shape out of the real look of nature. But nevertheless, that's just another point which I'll address in your commentary, your question, concerns. But the concept and general impression are easy to establish. I'm glad to hear that, if that's true for you. I'm glad that's so. But what do you mean by the general impression? So the ovoids are part of the general impression. The color scheme is part of the general impression. The overall sense that this whole pile of stuff at the end of your start can be transferred over and everything would go well. The proportions, the light effects would all feel like very transferable. Everything is in order in your version, in your interpretation. So that is an encompassing thing, though. So easy to establish. It is time-consuming to establish. The old rub-in model, you can just smear around and get a bunch of colors that sort of plausibly look right. But that's establishing a thing, easy. But it's like I think Hale said, that you can do that, but you won't find that it's of much use, because it's so inarticulate. But that's okay. I'm not trying to be too fine with this. I just want you to know that some of these points are actually worth the discussion as well. So, all right, I'm gonna look at pictures. I think I will go. Which way should I do this? That's a good question. I'm gonna go to my pictures were at first, and I'm gonna look at this. This is a moment. So you have these three. Let's look at this for a second. Let me give you the red thing, see if it helps. The laser beam. So I have this demonstration. I was trying to show a student how to start at the top and bottom. I was trying to show students how to do this and how to articulate, how to float, how to have them floating points, floating areas of drawing like that. You see this doesn't cut around to the arm. And certain parts of this are more evolved now. But there's this floating idea that I teach. But notice this, that the whole thing is trying to get this grand gesture to do the right thing. And in other words, to be tilted right, the ovoid, the proportions to be right, the tilt to be right. So all these things are going on, but they're going on with the look of nature at these places. So I think you, Mr. Unknown, are trying to do this same thing, but I am trying to get you not to be generic in places like this, so that each of these things, each of these areas that begin to be articulate, that is, begin to be useful or are well articulated in terms of the look of nature. So your finish is there in this phase. You can see how I'm talking about that. This isn't fine finish, but this area has a different quality from the sharpness over here. You can feel that in preliminary sense of form happening right there. So the sense of the hip is already there. So that's what I'm saying about incorporating something like the finish in the start. Now, one thing I have to admit that I do is I get around a bit on this, when you're trying to do it on this white paper, you're trying to preserve the lights beautifully. I do admit that I get around a bit typically with a lighter tone in the shadows. And then when I see that the thing seems to be working a bit, then I go ahead and go down to my darks and start making that this whole thing will become a unity very quickly, the darks. But I'm spotting around, floating those darks first, et cetera, right? One thing I do recommend against is what I've done here. So I've got a line here, and a line here, and a mass. And I do recommend you treat it like this, do a line and mass it. So draw this line only as dark as you intend to mass it. So I wonder if there's anything else I can say, but that's my idea, so that you're not delaying. You're actually trying to get the look of nature in areas earlier. You could look at this kind of a thing here, the articulation of a thing like this. What is that, But the articulation of this stuff over here, all these things are what are used to actually set up the painting. And the same thing is true over here with this very preliminary. This is a study, but I have a suspicion that his way of drawing is rather like this. If you're drawing an ensemble, or even if he's drawing a figure without all this junk around, he's doing this in visual order, as you can see. So I don't know if that has anything more to do with your question. I'll look one more time and see if there's more about that I can say. The hard part. So, oops. So, yeah. I think I may have answered your question. I'm not sure I can say more than that. So I'm going to jump now to the second question. If you were in the room, and I really am getting a little annoyed at talking to myself, talking to a blank screen over there, because I actually don't have the same capacity, oddly enough, as when I'm looking at a person and knowing what that person is, their understanding is, and even have a chance to have a little feedback. I'd love to have you say something back to me just about now. And I do have this in mind a little bit. I've talked about it before, of maybe getting one of you guys on here in some capacity, maybe on a Zoom or up in the corner of the thing or something to talk back to me. I still have that thought in mind. If any of you guys are inclined to do that, and I know one of you did respond, one of the Australians, so I may want to do that with you on the subject you brought up. I hope I didn't lose. I think you emailed me that, maybe. Hope I haven't lost track of that one. So here's the Thefordesmo. I like that. I'm undoubtedly pronouncing that wrong, but that's your handle online. I wonder what your opinion on the barg plates would be regarding block-ins. I'm sure you yourself and many other fine artists began their early learnings copying barg plates of cast drawings, moving on to other drawing doctrines. We actually didn't. I didn't have any barg plates. I didn't draw anything. I didn't copy anything. From the beginning of my education, I drew from life. And all the copying I did later was done with a, shall we say, an art motive. In other words, I was trying to understand somebody's composition, somebody's paint quality or something like that. So I copied to see if I could imitate it or see what it would take, what he was using, what kind of medium, what kind of brush, whatever, and those sorts of things. But I didn't learn anything doing barg plates. I don't think you learn anything copying from a two-dimensional thing. None of the important stuff. The important thing is to copy from life, to draw from life. And so I actually don't recommend copying anything. When I was a student, and I was a pretty good high school student, I found all these students who weren't very good, all of a sudden coming in with these pictures that were so fine. And I said, how in the heck did these guys have talent like that? Turns out they were just copying photographs. So this noodling thing is, the copying photographs, and especially the idea of transferring, from one to the other. My golly, I don't recommend it. I recommend totally against doing that unless you have a reason to copy. Now, when you have a reason to copy, and I'm not talking about learning how to paint, you don't copy the two-dimensional world to learn how to paint. You copy nature. That's the study of the painting. Painting is painting from life, right? It's presumed to be painting from life. Painting from photographs is its own thing. It's not even related. And so unless you're planning to be a photo jock the rest of your life, I doubt that I'd recommend you do the bark plates. But if you, but when we copied with Gamble, by the way, we'd go over to the fog and we'd copy a drawing. He would recommend that we set them side by side and copy and mark the same height and make a few measurements and make it exactly the same and then do the copying. But that was just purely because we had reasons to copy just to get our head around Ang, and we didn't want to be teaching ourselves to draw. When we had that problem, it was a different problem. So, and that's an interesting one, let's talk about conundrums. That's one that can be an issue. You got to understand that when you're at the very beginning of your phase, there's a reason to copy things, but it's not primarily to learn to draw. Okay, so I've mentioned before recently that I copied a Raphael because I didn't like my pencil marks or my charcoal marks, and I copied him to see how he made those marks that had that beautiful touch. And I copied him literally at every single mark, every one of them, I tried to do it. And finally, by the end of it, I felt like I had Raphael's hand in my arm. I felt like I owned his thinking, his mind, actually. Very interesting. So there are things you can do like that. But I still don't have any idea why anybody would copy these rather not even that significant things. I mean, some of them are nicer than others. Rather than working on a cast drawing, for example. I don't know. So I didn't do it. I'm in complete denial. And I was a student of Gamble's. And Gamble had these plates around, but he never once recommended that I use any of them. I don't know what circumstances would have caused him to even think that. Possibly memory drawing or something, but they were too big for that. He had the full-size plates. Barks, he didn't have a lot, by the way. I remember seeing only 3 or 4, maybe 6, I don't know. Barg's apparent recommendation would be to proceed first with a block in. I like the way you say that, the apparent recommendation. I really think that's a mistake when you try to apply that. This is a method for copying from a photograph or from a plate. But when you're copying from nature, that doesn't automatically apply, and I want to show you things about that. So it would be interesting to see you approach a bark plate. Now, I wouldn't approach a bark plate, so get over it. But would you try to? I don't even like copying anything, but if I had to copy, if I had something from a photograph and I had to use it in a painting, I would approach it exactly the same way as I approach everything, which I've already started talking about in this video, and I'll talk a little bit more about. Would you try to memorize the contour and put down searching lines in order to make it from the earliest mark, true from the earliest marks? Now you got my number, okay? That is what I would do. That's what I do when I'm drawing. I feel like that would require so much more work to fix and hone than starting first with a chiseling of block-ins and envelope. Yeah, and so that is one of those questions, which is the more likely to produce the results that you actually want. And and by the way, now I'm going to make my confession. I definitely was taught construction drawing, both in the Brackman class and in the Hale class. That was the conversation. It was all construction drawing. So we did all those things. But let me get to the images and we'll talk about it. I didn't put any of these out here. I couldn't find my images online. It was taking too long. But let me just put some images out there. I did do that. And I did not find it more practical, more useful. I was actually in the midst of doing it. Even when we were doing high-speed drawings, I was in the midst of shifting, even while I was in that first-year class. Because of best practices, they didn't get good results. It took too long, and they would exhaust me and make a mess of the paper. Those are the kinds of things that I found most strikingly difficult. So I've said enough, but I wanted to mention about these. I mean, that if you're trying to copy something in front of you, making measurements of things like in a sort of a sight-size mindset and all that sort of stuff. Gamble would recommend that, but not for the purpose of drawing from life. There was no such recommendation with him. And even the idea of blocking the shadow out as a big mass, Gamble definitely indicated he had us doing that. But he didn't work. We still weren't working from angles and point. I certainly wasn't. I was drawing shapes as they appeared from the very beginning with Gamble, with no other suggestion from him. So you can see in the bottom, in this one here, there's an implication of a great big architecture like this, and then there's a sub-architecture with a little more, variation. That's what you mean by gradually refining the stone, as if this was a marble stone and you're cutting it out. By the way, even Michelangelo doesn't do that, and he's a stone carver. So, well, you do see that though with wood carvers. And by the way, I've carved wood. I know that there are aspects of that that are really, really best practices. So I'm not, the way I found in my own playing around with it. But I'm not that expert, by the way. So don't don't quote me on that. But here again, this is the Harold Speed version of that model, though, that is the angle-based model. And this is what the planar model, and this is what Ang recommends against. He says don't do the planar model. His model was drawing the outline and rolling the form. Degas describes drawing as what happens between the outlines. So, but does that mean necessarily that he doesn't do angles and chunk his way around? Well, let's look and actually see. Let me come back to this painting part for a second. This is where we can look at Degas, and that, again, remember who he is. He's this guy. He's drawing the line. So here again, he's repeating this line over and over and over and over again. You see that? Now you're going to say that's tedious, but somehow this accuracy here is going to be an improvement on that. But I don't look at, if you look at these two drawings, which one has the more grace and the more efficiency? This doesn't strike me as actually being as complicated. Now this, you might argue that this is more complicated. I'm not going to dispute you on that, but this has a harder look, a more, a less gracious line because it's not evolved from the line, obviously. And according to his constructs here, or his, I was actually thinking that Speed might be the source of this construction. I've been trying to figure out who's the construction method guru, and it does look like Speed could be that guy. I mean, if he works this way and isn't just demonstrating. But this, if you're actually talking to a student about drawing and you don't talk to him about the angle and somebody missing this angle here or not getting this dramatic angle here, that's a big problem in your teaching, right? This angle even between here and here. These angles are very important things. So don't misunderstand me. When you're drawing what you see, you're wholly aware of these invisible things. There are a lot of invisible things in painting. Do you have to go in there and do a construct of the proportions first, or do you make those out of the same things you see? And that's where I'm going to say Western art really does live in drawing what you see and finding the proportions in it. And it isn't more tedious. I haven't found that to be so. Thefordesmo. So, but yeah, so that's kind of like your trade-off here. There's a discussion about the loss of neural energy, and that's where I find that this kind of drawing here, I start feeling exhausted, and I don't want to feel exhausted. I want to actually be talking about the beauty of the form before I get too far into it, and yet I don't want to be drawing things out of their time. So, because I want to do it when I'm fresh and when it's. And one of those other things I try to do is actually be involved in having this form here and even that shape, talking to this contour out here. I don't want to be living on the contour and then the subdivision and the subdivision. I want to be letting lots of things into the room to have the big conversation with. So I want form on this whole tubular thing, and I want two-dimensional shape. Degas is very good at two-dimensional shape. You can clearly see that he sees things as if they were just flat. He doesn't try to get into it or get around it. He's a flat cutter, and his sculptures even show that. He's a contour painter, but so what happens between the contours is what he calls drawing. So all this noodling in here, but it's that whole combination. And I tried to get form. I tried to even get the number of, so we say, players out there. I want to get those involved in a discussion with this outline in an incorporative way and not in a delayed way. So I'm not working from the outline and not working from planes. This is what these guys are talking about. There's another point I know I'm going to miss. I hope I don't forget it. But so this is, you see me again, you can see how my thinking works. This is exactly what I am trying to say. I'm working that way because of observing, you might even say, images like this and not finding this more. Now, by the way, people can say it's a matter of taste. I do find it's a matter of taste, but in part Some guys want to. I asked once Gamble was showing me Mantegna, and I said, really nice, but man, this is form hard, you know. And so I was picturing Correggio as the alternative to the Mantegna, and feeling a lot of pleasure in the form and the roundiness. And there's a sort of a boniness to Mantegna if you looked at him. It's worth a look. But so it is, Gamble is liking that. I guess it's a matter of taste, or it is a matter of expression. And by the way, one of the other things that I want to say while we're sitting here on this one, Thefordesmo, is that when you're drawing, if you're drawing this line here, the beauty of this line into the beauty of this line, and you're having to restudy them and restudy them, you realize you begin to be talking about the beauty of the corollaries, right? And I found that in when the walking your way in and gradually picking off pieces of smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, you don't get that repeated opportunity to revisit the beauty of this contour to this. Or you've drawn this contour to this, but all of a sudden you realize you haven't seen how beautifully it picks up this. And now so you're drawing it to this, and then so what I'm talking about is when you're drawing life as you see it, the lines as you see them, you're drawing from the beauty of that line. And I have often said to students that the accuracy is a beauty-driven thing, right? But so is the expression. So I find that I'm far more accurate when I look for the beauty of how these things relate. But it's going to take a review. You're going to put it down and then come back through and do it and reinvent parts of it because of what you found over here and how it played to that. Do you see what I mean? As well as to something else a different way. Okay, well that really is largely what I would be getting at with you in talking about these things. But if you're just talking about starts, even in painting, it's the same thing. You can see the Tarbell here isn't a planar painting. He's working from contours and masses, but it's not in a self-conscious way about cutting out shapes or cutting out planes or anything. It's built on the light effect model. It's built on on what's happening here by light, and then the look of nature at places like that. And you see him doing it right here. So he's going around the figure, setting up places like this and others. I'm going to look at your question again, see if there's something I think I wanted to talk about in here. But I'm in the same camp, though. I'm not drawing angular content here. I'm drawing the look of nature. Now, when you go around it the first time, it's not going to be as full of information. That part's real. That's coming as you begin to understand it better and as you begin to relate it more thoroughly to other things. And it's relatively simplified. For example, I'm not doing a plane. I'm basically doing an egg out here. And even when I'm doing these blobs, I'm doing them, trying to make them the right color and the right proportion, gesture, and that leading bit of line and the general impression it leaves on the face, but I'm not trying to draw a nose, right? And I'm certainly not trying to cut it out in plainer ways so it looks like a scarecrow or something like that. I'm not trying to do that. I don't know if you can see what I'm talking about as much, but you could look even at his shoe down here. You can see this look like a block in by Speed or somebody like that. But my work is about, masses, yeah, but it's about light effects and the interplay of this shape to whatever other shapes are out there. And these things are being used for plumb, getting angles right and all that sort of stuff. But it's a much more comprehensive thing, especially when you consider that I'm also doing color the whole time. I'm doing this whole ensemble. It's color related, it's line related, and all those things. And I've never found a great way to block my way in one linear step at a time. I find that it's an all-encompassing problem. You have to be doing color and light at the same time as you're doing proportion and gesture. And you have to be doing form and bean count, shall we say, texture, while you're doing, at the same time as you're doing just contour. So, yeah, it's very encompassing. That's the sort of the amusement about it. This is just another example of the same thing. I don't think I need to talk about it. But I'm going to look at your question again and see if I do need to talk about it. I'll just jump while I have these up here. I'm just going to show you that this look is so significantly different from my look here. And even that interpretation there, these aren't the same kind of ways of interpreting a figure. And it's more based, our ways are more based on the Angian one, right, which is a contour into round form model. And he rejected the planar idea, but this is clearly sort of planar from the beginning, this appears to be the start of that thing. So, but everybody, I mean, anybody who's doing this kind of work is fundamentally trying to use the contour, the values that meet over here, right, and all that sort of things. There's not much difference that way. If you're a good painter, you're always painting in the visual order of the effects. But rather than just doing a head or something like that. But I just wanted to show you these two, the planar versus the round. You can see a certain difference. This is by Harold Speed on the right, and that's on Ang on the left. So let's look at your question. I wonder if your opinion on Barg, okay, the Barg thing, okay. Would you memorize the contour and put down searching lines in order to make it true from the earliest marks? Yes. I feel like that would require so much more work to fix and hone than starting with a chiseling of block-ins and an envelope. Yeah. No, I know. And so you're going to have to explore both ways of working. Everybody out there is going to have to do that. Just consider, you know, everything. Consider everything. One of the things I try to recommend people, you as students do, is you consider what you want at the end of the first day even, but in what do you want to be as an artist? What do you want? What do you want to achieve from nature? What does nature have that you want to be good at, right? And so, among other things, of course, I say we ought to be good at the general impression of creating the sense of light and form, all of this, and all the horses at once in a general construct, right? But but then you want to say, well, I want to be good at form. I want to be good at proportions. I want to be good at color relations, light effects, whatever. You can make it up. I want to be good at line, contour, the beauty. I mean, listen, you want to, of course, be good at line. The beauty of it, the fun of an impressionist painting, by the way, is that you don't have to go around painting the outline of this figure. You can do this line for a very long time, just talking to this one over here, floating these things around, talking to that one, and get this huge enjoyment out of it, right? I think part of what makes people want to do construction drawing is you have a figure. You think you're drawing a figure. But the impressionist knows he's not drawing a figure. The impressionist is drawing an impression. So where's the figure? He wouldn't go around constructing this figure. He'd be around blurring his eyes and constructing this mass here and finding what it did at this edge. Or if there are any color shifts in it, he would be painting those things. But if you can follow what I'm saying, it's not simply object related. And we've talked about those continuities that you see in that form of painting. So when I'm doing this head, I'm not blocking in the face or any of those things. I'm just playing with all the players out here that are in the entire field, from the strongest ones and how they interrelate to each other, to the next level and the next level and the next level in a continuum, right? That in this case incorporates drawing, color, and light as well. So, yeah. It's funny. I felt bad at the beginning of this thing. I think I'm attacking the same stuff over and over again. But I'm hearing myself saying things in ways that might be different enough to give you all a different read on it. And I think that question, the first question, unknown, really sets that up. Because he's struggling with this or working hard on this sort of a thing and getting lots of what I'm saying. So, by the way, anything you might see here in relation to proportions that are off, it would be my duty in this phase to do things to correct it. If this head is too small, I'm not saying any of those things are true, or if to whatever extent anything is wrong in this picture, it's my job to not go forward, not keep proceeding forward, but to in fact take the time right there on the spot and do the correcting, bring it into continuity with itself, gesturally and proportionally, or whatever's out there, and whenever you're making a shape like this, back your brain up and see what other part of this picture is actually giving it its information, what it needs to be playing off of. This was certainly going to be a player to that, but how much of this is playing to that, and so on, or how much of this is playing to this, and these are all things that are you're just taking them in, and you work at these sorts of things instead of working at in the Barg way of working, instead of just hacking around this thing over and over again. And again, remember that lots of this stuff has nothing to do with a figure. It's just value units and the way they interplay with each other. And again, that's where, a certain Boston School Impressionism really takes a shift. And most of those guys who were beginning to work in this other way had realized that the mass with minimal drawing or with limited types of drawing, with not the old drawing of the object anymore, but drawing, intermittent drawing, shall we say. And I do mean when I say drawing here now, I mean drawing a silhouette, the line on a silhouette, the contour of a, but in this case, we're talking about not the contour of objects. They may happen to be that, but we're talking about the contour, and therefore I call it the silhouette created by a dark meeting a light, right? Okay. All right. I've been long again. You'll like this, won't you, Mr. Producer? Jazz, I got questions from you, other people. I will get to as many of those as I can, as soon as I can. There's probably 5 or 6 out there, but keep the comments coming. Thank you all for your donations. Thanks for your comments and sharing and subscribing and liking. And I even like it when you talk to each other online. It's good stuff. So, and a couple of you guys have come around with some very strikingly interesting statements in recent comments. Believe me, I enjoy those. I usually say something about them below your comments, so you might look wherever you put the comments if you can find them again. I think they sort of stay around that video. I don't go around looking for them much, but anyway, well, this was fun, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. All right. Yeah, do well with your work, and I'll see you in the next one.